Okay, hi guys, it is good to see you again bright and early. So I want to start off by introducing the other members of our Peer Health Exchange team who will be popping in today. I promise I will not be the only one talking for 8 hours, so you're welcome. So Danielle Harbison, she's our executive director, so she's in charge of making sure PHE gets funded so that we can go to workshops and I have an office to go to and those kinds of things. Elizabeth Finlayson is our external affairs associate, so her job is to support Danielle in getting grants and stewarding donors and that kind of fun financial stuff that I'm happy I don't have to worry about. Danya Rosen is actually with our national team, and she has a flu today, so she will not be here, but she is the senior director of development and works a lot in building pipelines and fundraising on a national level. You will also be seeing Michael Sugihara. He's our newest program manager. He manages DePaul and UIC. And then Matthew O'Brien is our program manager for Consistency Pilot as well as Northwestern. I already introduced myself yesterday, and you guys don't get to see my really cool LinkedIn photo, so I'm happy about that. And then we also have Angela with us. If you didn't meet her yesterday, she is in charge of all the evaluation stuff for Peer Health Exchange, and she's just in town and wanted to hang out with you guys on her Saturday, so she's going to be participating in our retreat with us. So our agenda for today, we're going to cover a lot of skills-based trainings and some also cultural competency training. So we're going to start off with power, privilege, and oppression, and then our first skill will be classroom presence, going to what you do directions, using student names, positive narration, student-friendly language, checking for understanding, and then an overview of your teaching skills evaluation. And in between all these, we'll have breaks, there will be lunch, we have snacks, as well as tons of coffee. So don't worry, I know it's kind of intimidating, so I'll get all those trainings back. But there's also an agenda in your folder. And also before we start, I want to mention that there's an exit slip in your folder, and this is really important. It goes back to what the feedback piece that Mimi just said. So we ask that you give us feedback on how you felt your day went on the trainings. If you have feedback for me or any of the other program managers in terms of how you felt we led the training, that's something we'd like you to give to us or to your LC or CC. And the exit slip is supposed to be on the content of the trainings and the retreat as a whole. So just want to make that clear because I'll be asking you to fill out your exit slips. Does anyone have any questions about what we just discussed? Okay, so we're going to jump into the first training, led by me. We're going to talk about power, privilege, and oppression, how it influences the work that we do at Peer Health Exchange, and why it's important to build self-awareness around yourself as an educator before you get into the classroom so that you can build the best relationships you can with your students. So what are the ways in which our own identities influence the work that we do as health educators? I'd like you to take about 30 seconds to think of this, and then I'll hear some responses. Okay, so now you've had time to reflect individually. What were some of the things that you thought about when you looked at this question? I'd like to see a hand or two. Yeah, Noah.
The fact that we're peers means we're that much more relatable to the students that we're teaching.
Yeah, definitely. Maya?
It also might be easy to go into the classroom with preconceptions about like what you're going to expect, and that just because of like how our life experiences and how we have interacted with the communities, and that's can be a good thing, but also like cannot.
Yeah, exactly. So preconceptions, I think it's really important to work to recognize that you may have some preconceptions, and then think about how you can overcome those. Let's hear from one more person. Yeah, what's your name?
Our personal experiences affect how comfortable we are with various situations that we might be
Yeah, definitely. So how our own influence or experiences influence the material we teach. So we're going to do a lot of exploring about our identity today and how it relates to PHE. So I want to think about our mission before we get started. So our mission is to give teens the knowledge and skills that they need to make healthy decisions. And we provide health education in schools that otherwise lack health education, right? And this is a really important word here, lack. So these schools wouldn't have health education, which means the word lack signifies an inherent inequality in their school, or in these schools. And we need to consider how we, as Pure Health Exchange, as a nonprofit, and not Pure Health Exchange as an individual level, as a health educator, functions within an inequitable system, right? And so before we move on, does anyone know the difference between inequality or equality and equity? Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but it sounds to me like perhaps equality is having everybody be the same versus equity is giving everybody the same opportunity.
Yes, that's actually exactly right. And this handy little image that you can find on Google illustrates this. So equality is sameness. So it gives everyone the same thing. You can see all these guys have the same box, but they don't have the same view of a baseball game. And with equity, it means access to the same opportunities. So they all have different boxes and they're standing on different levels, but they all have the same view of the field. Does anyone have any questions about equity or equality? It's just something to keep in mind as we move through our training. So a critical piece to being effective is building our self-awareness around our perceptions, biases, identities, cultures, and experiences, and how they influence our experiences in the classroom. So I'd like you to take 1 minute to complete the following sentence. As a member of Pure Health Exchange, developing self-awareness is critical to blank. Please just turn to a person sitting next to you and have a 1 minute conversation. I'll let you guys know when you have about 10 seconds left, and then we'll do a group share out. Partner, what were some of the ways in which you chose to finish the sentence? Yeah.
So our group talked about developing self-awareness in order to build trust between us as the teachers and then the students that we're working with.
Yeah, so building trust is really key part of that. Excellent. Yeah. What's your name?
Me, Seth.
Seth? Cool.
Yeah. One thing we said is that being aware of experiences that you have that you perceive as universal, but that are in fact not universal in your own experiences.
Yeah, excellent. So bringing it back to self-awareness about our own experiences and being careful about applying this to others.
Yeah.
How about a couple more? Yeah, what's your name? Tessa.
I feel like self-awareness is really critical as far as knowing what your own strengths and biases are as well, because I feel like through that you really know what it is that you specifically for you apply.
Yeah, so it's not just about how it wouldn't connect, but how you can. What are your strengths? I think that's really important as well. Let's hear one more response before we move on. Yeah.
I guess just getting better, like reflecting and seeing where you can improve, not just as an educator, but just in general.
Yeah, excellent. So bringing it to your experiences outside of the classroom as well, or how you can grow from them. Awesome. So could someone read for me the 3 objectives that are on the PowerPoint? Actually, Audrey, I'm calling someone else because you're awesome and contribute. Yeah, in the back.
Describe personal identities and experiences relating to power, privilege, and oppression. Identify various power, privileges, and oppressions that accompany our own identity groups and other social categories. And explain 3 to 4 ways that power, privilege, and oppression affect our work.
Awesome. Thank you for reading those. So hopefully by the end of this training, these 3 objectives are something that you will walk away with from this training being able to do. And with that, we are going to get into our training. So I'd like to define some key terms so we're all on the same page throughout the training. You may have heard these terms before, you may be engaged in lots of conversations about power, privilege, and oppression, or this may be your first time considering or talking about these ideas. And that's why we want to norm around these definitions so that we're all entering this conversation with a common understanding of the terms we're talking about. And feel free to jot these down as we go along. Next slide. Great. So could someone read for me the definition of power?
ability to do something or act in a particular way.
Exactly. So, what do you guys think is an example of how our personal power can be constrained? Yeah.
Rules and laws.
Yeah, so rules and laws affect what we can and cannot do, or may punish us for doing something. And power can also be constrained by who we are, our experiences, and where we come from. So in theory, all of us can do whatever we want. In reality, we all know that's not true. Could someone, Could someone read for me Could someone read for me the definition of privilege? Steve.
An often invisible advantage, right, or benefit that is not available to everyone.
So in what ways do you think that privilege and power are related? Yeah, what's your name?
Jasmine.
Jasmine.
Having privilege might expand your power, and vice versa. So I think there's a direct correlation between the two.
Yeah, excellent. So power and privilege privilege often mirrors and supports already existing power structures and vice versa. Can I have the next slide? Could someone read for me the definition of oppression? Yeah, in the back, what's your name?
Donna.
Donna? Cool, thanks Donna.
Oppression occurs when individuals are systematically subjected to political, economic, cultural, or social degradation because they belong to a social group.
So a key word in here that I want you to think about is systematic. So oppression isn't something that can only be experienced under one context. It's something that can be triggered by an external actor. It can be triggered by the situation, other people you're around. It's something that kind of is at a society level and we may not have control over as an individual whether or not we get to experience it. Does anyone have any questions about these three definitions before we move on? Okay. So Mimi already reviewed the community agreements, but I want to add a couple more for our session today because we're going to be talking about things that may be sensitive. So on top of the four we already discussed, the right to pass is a really important norm for this session. So if you ever feel uncomfortable with something we're doing to the point where you don't want to be in the room, maybe you might have a triggering response to something that has been said, you have a right to pass. You do not have to participate, you do not have to share with your group. If you need to talk to your LC or leave the room, that is totally fine too. So I just want to make that clear today that everyone does have a right to pass and you're not going to be judged or forced to share something you don't feel comfortable sharing. The second is yes and. So a lot of times when we're talking with people or having a discussion and want to say our own opinion, we use the word but. Like, I agree with you, but this is what I think. So but is a really small word, but it can also be a marginalizing word. Essentially what you're doing is telling other people that your opinion is a little more important than theirs. So I challenge all of you today while we're having these discussions to use the word yes and agree with someone and add your opinion. And I know it sometimes can be just a verbal tick and hard to get out of your language, but it's just something to be aware of as we have our conversations today. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to these group norms or comment on the two that we added? Okay, we can move on. So I'd like you guys to turn to page 47 in your volunteer training manuals. Yeah, what's your name?
Rachel.
Rachel.
I could think of two reasons. One, it has a lot to do, a lot of these things have a lot to do with what we do, what we educate students on in PHE, such as gender, abilities, and sexuality. But also a lot of these in the middle aren't quite as fluid as the ones on the external curriculum. Like you can't change your race, you're born into whatever class you're in now. You don't have too much control over your size, you have no control over your sexuality or ability. Pretty well set things.
Excellent. Does anyone have anything to add to what Rachel said? Yeah.
They all have a lot to do with power, privilege, and oppression.
Awesome. Yes, they all have a lot to do with power, privilege, and oppression. A lot of these terms are linked to isms that historically have oppressed groups of people in our society, like heterosexism, racism, classism, sexism. And they're really integral aspects of your identity that will, and building self-awareness around them, will help you in the classroom. So this is an example of my identity wheel, and everyone at Pure Health Exchange actually went through the same training that you're going through now, so we all have these wheels filled out. And if you want to look at it closer later, if you can't read it, that's totally fine too. So we're gonna do this activity wheel for yourself, and then you're gonna discuss it in your workshop group. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so as you're filling out your wheel, I want you guys to reflect as you're doing it, to think about the feelings or thoughts you may have as you're filling out categories. How are you reacting? What are you thinking about? What's easy for you to fill out, and what might be difficult and why? So please reflect on those as you take the time to fill out this wheel. We're going to have 5 minutes to do this individually and silently, and then we're going to have 15 minutes to discuss as your wheel as your workshop group. Can anyone repeat back to me what we're about to do? Yeah.
Take 5 minutes to fill out
Can
the
everyone
wheel.
please be quiet before we move to the wheel activity? Thanks.
Take 5 minutes to fill out the wheel, then 15 to discuss it with your group.
Awesome. Yeah, question?
Yeah, quick question. What do you mean by ability?
Guys, I'd really appreciate if you could save the comments for the discussion part because I couldn't hear what you asked me. Thanks.
What exactly do you mean for ability?
So ability could mean your physical ability, it could mean how you view your mental abilities. It's kind of up to you how you choose to interpret each category. So there's no black and white interpretation. All right, I'll let you know when you have about 1 minute left to finish filling out your identity. You can begin now.
So when you
This is supposed to be a quiet activity that you do individually. Another minute to finish with the wheel. Okay, cool. So now that you guys have individually done this, we're going to take 15 minutes to do a small group discussion in your workshop groups. So I'd like you to discuss the 3 questions that are on the board. So 1, describe your wheel, and it's important to remember that you have the right to pass. If there's a part of your wheel that you don't want to share with your group, that's totally fine, you don't have to. Share what thoughts and feelings came up when you were filling out different pieces of your wheel. What were the portions are the hardest for you to fill out, and what were the easiest, and why might you think that? So you're gonna have 15 minutes to do this. You're gonna be discussing within your workshop groups. So if you need to, workshop groups can come and sit here, or a couple can go out in the hallway. We'll give you a 1 minute reminder, and then we're going to do a whole group share out when you're done discussing. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, it is right now 10:54, so come back here at 11:06. Okay, cool. Can I have all eyes back on me?
All right,
All right. I'm just gonna wait until you guys have your eyes clear and are silent so I can keep going. Or, you know, we can Okay, so thank you to a partners group for letting me listen to your conversation. It was really interesting to see volunteers grapple with the same sort of things that I did when I was filling out my identity wheel. So now that you've had a chance to discuss this in your groups, I want to do a whole group share out to some of the things that you found interesting, challenging, and surprising about filling out your identity wheel. So what were some of the reactions you felt when you were filling out your wheel?
Yeah, like me. I think I was just surprised at how difficult some of the boxes were to fill out. I looked at it initially and was like, oh, this will be easy. And then I went to start writing and it felt hard all of a sudden.
What were some of the parts that were hard for you, if you don't mind sharing?
I think personality was a weirdly hard one. Is it the personality you feel you have, or how others perceive you, or someone mentioned it too?
Did anyone else struggle with that? Yeah.
I thought it was
personality changes by the day or what you're doing or who you're talking to. So I don't know if that's really, it's hard to explain, you know, which personality.
Yeah, totally. What were some of the other aspects of the wheel that might have been difficult to fill out? Yeah.
I've got it. So, one of my things, like every time I think about these things, is for gender. I'm a binary identified trans guy, and so I always like want to write man, but that's also not the whole story for me, and I don't know necessarily how to like classify that all the time.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate you're willing to be open with us. And I think that that's kind of like the difficult part of this activity is that there are categories and very clearly defined boxes, but there's so many variations and shades of gray within them. It's like you have to pick that for yourself, but a lot of times we jump to what other people may think of us. What else did people struggle with or were surprised about? Mona?
Just a little open up to just like the size thing, because I kept thinking like, okay, like how do people see me struggling with body image, which is like how it's common, but you always like think that, okay, well, when I look at myself on a good day, I think I look like this, on a bad day I think this, and what are people, what are my friends thinking, what's my family thinking, so it's like trying to find one word to just put in this box.
Yeah, so a lot of the identity markers, especially styles, can be, we struggle between objective and subjective. Kendall, is that your hand?
Yeah, I think, I was talking about this with my group, I think something like class is really hard for people to answer because everyone wants to kind of be like a middle class person. Even if you are upper class, it's kind of difficult to like upper class or say something like upper middle class. Or I mean, if you're on the poor side, you're still kind of trying to put yourself in the middle class and everything. Just because that's like, I think like the optimum kind of thing to say, like I'm in the middle, I'm not too privileged, I'm not underprivileged.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really great point about classes. It's hard to identify yourself. And sometimes you don't want to identify with your parts of your identities that may seem too privileged or oppressed. Aparna?
So what I thought was interesting was, and some of the people in my group shared this thought, was that the external dimension, some questions in the external dimension of the wheel were harder to answer than the internal dimension. For example, regional connection. I've moved around a lot from a very young age, and it's very hard to form a connection with a place. I mean, if you're focusing solely on race, then like that's a different story. But I've lived in India, I've lived in Hong Kong, I'm going to school in the United States, and I've spent a big chunk of my life in all of those places. So that was a really challenging question for me to ask, for me to think about and reflect on, and how I would even vocalize that.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're thinking about the aspects of the wheel that were a little more difficult to fill out, how are they, or were they, related to the previous terms when we talked about power, privilege, and oppression? Yeah, what's your name?
Alamede.
Alamede? Cool.
We realized that, like, even though we all have very different responses to the majority of the questions, we always sort of had a reflection that referred to, like, how other people treated us based on whatever the category was. And generally, if that made us feel good, if that made us feel bad, if that made us feel powerless. So I think that, I don't know, I just think that all of these things, even size, which we didn't really expect to affect us, sort of boil down to like how we're perceived.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, what's your name?
Izzy?
Izzy.
I think like going back to the class thing that was discussed earlier, writing down anything that felt like a kind of polarizing quality felt more difficult. Like it's easier to write average than it is to write something that you think gives you power or takes it away.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to put yourself out there, even if you're just writing it and you don't have to share it with your group. And then for our last question before we move on to the next activity, how do you think that these identities that we discussed or you wrote down influence your lived experiences, and how might they influence beliefs? Yeah.
Sam.
Sam.
Okay, so personally I think that for someone that comes from maybe like an oppressed group or a minority group, the stigma surrounding whatever they identify as would definitely influence how they live because they have this perception of them or stereotype or whatever it may be that isn't exactly them. It's just what people think of them because they're that group. So I guess it can definitely influence your life negatively, and I guess conversely, you know, being privileged or powerful group, you can live a very nice life without ever having to identify with any of the oppressed groups. It could be like, for what, like a white privilege example, I suppose. And that would be the one I guess I most identify with. You never work for it, you're born with it. You live a nice life because of it. You never have to worry about not getting a job because of your ethnicity. You never have to worry about stereotypes or anything like that. So,
yeah, that's an excellent point. Like a big part of privilege is never having to ask the question about your privilege. You can just kind of go along in ignorance. And I think also like the idea that you touched on in terms of perception of other people. Like for me, when I was writing my wheel, it was really scary to me at first because I was like, I'm showing this to all of our volunteers. And I'm writing queer in that little box that says sexuality. And that was something that was really intimidating for me to share with everybody. And I think that from the discussions I heard that other people may have felt the same way about different categories. So what were some other ways that you think your lived experiences might influence the world? Yeah, Audrey.
Personally, just speaking from like my own privileged background, I feel like before I acknowledged my privileges, like I had a very narrow perspective, and I felt like I realized like since I only like look at my own experiences, like the things I say and like assumptions that I make about other people, they might be hurtful to others who might not have the same privileges as me. So I guess I feel like my own identity sometimes I feel like it causes this blindness in me to like other people's experiences, especially things that I say and I see things about other people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That addressing and owning your privilege can really expand your worldview. Yeah, allow me to.
Sorry. Just as like I was just thinking about this with my professional connections, and I lived in a lot of like various areas of the world, presenting as mostly like just myself, just black and very feminine. But like those lived experiences in various parts of the world have really like opened my eyes to like the various ways that people are treated. So like I definitely feel more compassionate. I definitely feel like also like another thing you talked about was being openly queer in various environments, and just like how that affects how you're treated, assumptions made about you. And I just feel like, I don't know, like in terms of how my identity affects my lived experiences, I just realized, I don't know, it's one of the reasons that I got really into history, because I was wondering why when I travel here am I treated this way. You know, I'm treated way differently in Southern California or Cleveland than I am in, like, say, Dubai or Ghana. And, like, that in and of itself made me just, like, really investigate who I was. So, I don't know, I don't know, just things you can't change about yourself.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome response. So now we're going to move on to our next activity. In the interest of time, I know that this training seems very short for the topic that we are trying to discuss today. Next slide. So, does anyone remember the stand-up, sit-down activity from last year? You were a volunteer? Okay, awesome. So, I have a volunteer. Before anybody moves, don't move. Could I have a volunteer explain to me how this activity works? No, I think shots fired. You should kind of step up. It doesn't even go here.
No, so I'm assuming that, you know, somebody rings off whatever listed and stand up as
Yeah, so what Sam said is that essentially there will be a series of prompts that I read, and if you feel that the prompt applies to you, you can stand up. If you feel that the prompt does not apply to you, you can remain seated. If you'd like to abstain, you can put your hands on your head, or you can just remain seated if you don't want people to know that you're abstaining. And could I go next? So there's some guidelines to this activity. There's no right or wrong answer. How you interpret each prompt is how you can respond to it. There's no set way to think about these statements, and you can interpret them in any way that you choose and respond to them in any way that you choose. Additionally, While you're going through the activity, I'm going to pause after I read each statement so that you have a chance to turn around and look at the responses of your peers. And as you do this, I want you to continue to be reflective like you were in the activity wheel and focus on not making assumptions. And if you do make assumptions about the responses of your peers, I want you to check yourself and think about why you may have made that assumption and where that thought is coming from. Additionally, this is a silent activity. I want you to be respectful of your peers as we go through this and really take the time to absorb what's going on around you. I'd also like you to make sure that you're reflecting on your own thoughts, feelings, and any physical reactions you might be having as you respond to these prompts. And finally, I want to revisit the right to pass. So if you feel like you don't want to participate in the activity, if you don't want to respond to a statement, that is completely fine. That is up to you. It's your choice. No one's going to make you stand or sit down or respond in any particular way. Does anybody have any questions about what we're about to do? Okay, so now I'd like you to take the time to move anything. If the desks are up or you've got your thing on your lap, put it up now. I want to like topple over, try and stand up. Hey, everybody got the debris cleared away from that? All right. So I'm going to read the first prompt, and then you'll respond. I'll pause, and then we'll continue on. So please remember to be silent and respectful while we're doing this activity. So please stand up if you are in college. Okay, you can sit down. It's supposed to be a silent activity, guys, so please try and stem any conversation and hold until after the activity. Thank you. Please stand up if you identify as male. Okay, you sit down. Please stand if someone you know or yourself is undocumented. Okay, you can sit down. Stand if there were 50 or more books in your house when you were growing up. Okay, you can sit down. Stand if you can hold hands with your partner on the street without fear of harassment or violence. Okay, you can sit down. Please stand if you can expect to have days off from work or school for your religious holidays. Stand if you have never been or have virtually never been harassed on the street because of your gender. Okay, you can sit down. Stand if your neighborhood was free from gun violence when you were growing up. Okay, you can sit down. Please stand if your life or the life of a significant other has not been significantly impacted by mental illness. Okay, you can sit down. Stand if you had your own bedroom when you were growing up. physically able to enter or exit a building. Okay, you can sit down. Please stand if you were ever told that you were not acting enough like your perceived gender identity. Okay, you can sit down. Please stand if you ever experienced bullying in elementary, middle, or high school. You can sit down. Please stand if you had health education when you were in high school. Okay, you can sit down. So, thank you for participating in that activity and doing so respectfully. I really appreciate it. Okay, so like before, we're going to do a 15-minute debrief conversation within your workshop group. You can go back to the spots you were in before, and we're going to address these 2 questions. And if you're an LC with your workshop group going outside, please take a picture of this so you can remember to address these questions. And then, while your LCs are technically leading this conversation, I challenge all of you to be honest, candid, and stick to our norms when we're having this conversation, and truly try to understand the perspectives of the other people in your group, and make sure you're holding them to the same standard that you hold yourself. And remember that you have a right to pass in this conversation as well. Does anyone have any questions about what we're going to do? Okay, you have 15 minutes. We'll be giving a 1-minute warning when your time is almost up. The actions that you guys had to this activity. So now I'd like to take the time to hear out some of the responses and reflections that you have from doing this activity.
I felt the activity, at least for me, was very wholesome, and like you recognize people that were similar, people that weren't similar, you were aware of what event you had, the discounts you had, it was very much everything. So validated, but also had to be perspective, so it was very grounded.
Thank you. What were some other, yeah?
I thought it was like interesting that like how many times I found myself either being in like the majority or not being in the majority, and like when I was not in the majority of things, like I just thought that was normal, but like apparently not a lot of people are like that, you know. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see it all play out in front of me.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you were able to like synthesize and look at the responses of the other people around you. Yeah.
Our group talked about how a lot of these questions were very simple, like yes or no questions, but they were addressing issues that are much more complex than just yes or no. You know, things about gender, even something like feeling safe in your neighborhood. You know, like you can feel unsafe in your neighborhood even if you don't hear gunshots. And so simplifying it down into this yes or no, like I'm either standing up or I'm sitting down, didn't really cover everything that was going on with a lot of these issues.
Yeah, definitely. And that may not be possible to do. Yeah.
I definitely think that it was maybe limiting, and I also think that I liked the way the questions were phrased. Like I thought they were phrased really well to like be like widely applicable, so you could interpret it your own way, and you didn't feel like you were defining yourself too much by each question. So I liked that in terms of the questions. Like I was happy that they weren't too specific.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes, you.
On the other hand, because the questions were very like yes or no questions, when I struggled to give a yes or no answer, it made me think more about why. Because like, oh, okay, why am I questioning, you know, something? Why am I questioning a certain answer? What are the reasons behind that? And what are the different cultural, personal experiences that has led me to not give just a straight up yes or no answer?
Did anyone else have that experience? Yeah. can't, Adrian, is that
No, I
you?
was saying yes,
Yeah.
I have. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you can share how you feel, but you don't have to.
Oh, okay. I guess for that one, the one that whether you or somebody like significant to you have ever experienced mental illness, that was one of the ones where I stood up even though like I shouldn't have because I haven't personally experienced mental illness, but like somebody like significant to me has. So that was like one of the ones where like my initial response was like, oh no, that doesn't apply to me, and then I like thought about it more and realized that it did, and then I like thought about the ways that affected me and like yeah, I thought that was
Great. Yeah.
Going off of what that person said, I definitely like agree with that because for that same question, I like didn't stand up and then I like thought about it more and I'm like, oh, I'm just being like, and I actually thought about like what mental illnesses are and like how that covers a very broad spectrum of things and that I actually do have friends and I have like several very close friends who have struggled with like not what people would necessarily typically think of mental illness, but like with like say mental health issues.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
I like
and
how-
can you remind me of your
Ada.
Ada.
Yes. Sorry. I like how sort of your like that 50 books question. That was a good question. It was just like because you don't think about it like books, but at the same time books sort of show like the culture of your environment, how your family, like what things are important, and like the ability to afford books. And I didn't realize sort of like I didn't stand up during the gun violence neighborhood question because like I grew up like it was people say it wasn't safe, but I always felt safe. And I knew it was around, but I always felt like really comfortable. But like until I moved out of that neighborhood, I realized that like I got books after. I didn't have books while I was in it. So the books were kind of like this subtle hint of that like, oh, we have some money, we have some cash, like you know, like because so it was just like realizing that like my life isn't stagnant. Like there's evolutions. Like you were constantly going. Like even though it felt like this monotonous life of like living in Houston, like you had like stages in your life where you may have been doing better or worse, and like it's like looking at it in hindsight makes you really like fully aware of like the advantages and the disadvantages where you're living.
Yeah, I'm glad that first of all, that was a great response. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's interesting because in the group that I observed as well, the books question came up, and it's something that I didn't expect that question to have such an impact. I don't know why, but you know, maybe that's reflective of my own privilege, and well, it probably is. So it was really, I'm so glad to hear that question kind of brought forth others and a lot of reflection. So in the interest of time, we have to move on. Can I have the next slide? So that said, we will have time more as the year goes on to talk about power, privilege, and oppression and this discussion. But I'd like you to complete the following prompt independently. I see power, privilege, and oppression affecting my work as a PhD volunteer blank. And if you're a new health educator, think about how you might foresee these 3 factors influencing your work. We'll take about 30 seconds to fill in the blank. You don't have to write it down, you can just think about it too if you want. All right, so what were some of the ways in which you felt finish this sentence? Yeah, Madison.
I know for me, I went to a small Catholic all-girls school, and so it was obviously very like focused on education. So I am very surprised going to some of the schools, just like shocked actually at the quality of education that these kids are getting because it's not something I was ever exposed to. So.
Yeah, definitely. I only would caution you in that you don't want to make assumptions about the quality of the education, but it's definitely important to recognize the inequity and
just like
disparities.
the classroom environment and just imagining that it would be very hard for me to learn in some of the environments.
Yeah, definitely. Self-awareness about your own experiences versus potentially others. What about some other people who thought about this? Yeah.
I think just My situation is fairly invisible. You know, I'm trans, and because of that, I lack a certain kind of privilege. But it's not like most people look at me and are immediately aware of that. And I always apply that to other people, and I'm like, well, I don't actually know their entire story, and that can go in both directions. Like, I don't know all the students we work with. They could be more privileged than we're aware of, or less privileged than we're aware of, or be like lacking a certain kind of privilege or whatever. And I always think about that, and I think that's important working with students because you need to always be thinking about that.
Yeah, excellent. You always have to be checking yourself and not making assumptions. Steph.
So we talked in our group about how the yes-no aspect of it can cause us to have assumptions in our head about why people are standing up or sitting down without really knowing the whole story, even if we're conscious of the fact that we're making assumptions. And I think that also works like in reverse, like how our students see us. Like just knowing the fact that we're college students or that we attend the University of Chicago in particular can cause them to like think of us in a certain way or like our background or how we got there. So I think it works both ways.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does. And now thank you for those responses. We're going to have to move on because of time. But this is definitely a question and a sentence that I think you'll see play out when you do get into the classroom. Can I have the next slide? I'll be good at that. Okay, next slide. So this is the end of the Power, Privilege, and Oppression training. And I just want to say thank you for having this conversation with me and with each other today. This is a really large conversation to have within an hour and a half, and it's something that we're going to continue formally through 2 follow-up workshop group meetings that discuss some nuances of power, privilege, and oppression, like microaggressions. And this is also something I encourage you to truly continue on your own outside of PHE. When I was a senior in high school, I went to Evanston Township High School. Where Northwestern is, I did this in a sociology class my senior year, the stand-up, sit-down activity, and it's something that has really stayed with me ever since. It was the first time I truly thought about privilege, and it was a really kind of like mind-blowing experience for me, and since then, I've only continued to think and work on that more than myself and within the work I do, and I think it's something that if you truly decide to engage in outside of your Held Exchange, it can really, truly only benefit you in the classroom and in other aspects of your life. So that said, our training for Power, Privilege, and Oppression is over. There's an exit slip in your folder I would like you to fill out. After you're done with the exit slip, we're going to take a 5-minute break.